Good morning and welcome to Global Shift, where we track the global transition away from the neoliberal world disorder towards a new emerging planetary order and help to unpack and make sense of the latest news and geopolitical events. This is a very brief special video detailing developments in the Middle East that will have enormous consequences in the context of the current tensions in world affairs that we are covering on this site. The Palestinian leadership of the Gaza Strip, home to over 1.9 million people, 44% of whom are age 14 or under, has stopped the world in its tracks, led by the Qassam brigades, a section of Hamas's military wing. The worst breach of Israel's defences was perpetrated since Egypt crossed the Suez Canal seeking to regain control of Sinai from Israel's occupiers in 1973. Going back to that time in 1973, Israel actually would have collapsed hadn't Henry Kissinger organized Operation Nickel Grass, an operation which took 32 days, and it was the US Air Force Military Airlift Command which shipped 22,325 tons of tanks, artillery, ammunition and supplies in C-141 Starlifters and C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft between the 14th of October and the 19th of November 1973 to Israel. This October the 7th, this last Saturday, the Qassam brigades attacked Israeli military installations along the fortified walls and electronic fences, sealing Gaza off from the world. This time, the US sent the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford and its battle group in response. It is now also sending another aircraft carrier, the USS Dwight Eisenhower, as backup to the Mediterranean. These massive reinforcements of Israel's military position have two goals. The first is to help Israel reorganize and resupply its army, which is in disarray after the Qassam brigade's attack. The second is to back up a phone call from the White House to Iran's leadership, warning it and its Hezbollah allies in southern Lebanon to stay out of the conflict. Along with the phone call to Iran, the White House also decided to freeze $6 billion worth of Iran's money, which had recently been sent to Qatar for payment in exchange for the release of American prisoners. And this was done on the basis that Iran had planned this current operation with Hamas. The Iran money from oil sales had previously been frozen in South Korean banks on some pretext to do with the US sanctions regime. Anyway, Israel, bereft of ideas on the military front, has been bombing Gazan civilians randomly, continuously and heavily in the past few days. After Iranian leader Ibrahim Raisi consulted with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman with a view to the Saudis intervening with the White House on these matters, a very significant event took place. Iran's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Hossein Amir Abdullahian, landed in Beirut and announced that Iran will intervene in the current conflict if Israel doesn't stop bombing Gaza. This is a very big deal. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, having criticized Israel all week, has changed tactics in Ukraine. Instead of opening a new northern front, he has ordered an offensive across the entire existing front line, where one military observer says that he has never seen such a concentration of tanks used by Russians against Ukrainian defensive positions. And this is another very big deal. A whole list of sources supporting all the steps in this discussion are made available in the video description box below. So, what happened last Saturday? Following more than 2 years of subterfuge by Hamas that involved keeping its military plans under wraps and convincing Israel that it did not want to fight, the Qassam brigades launched a breathtaking attack, which Major Nir Dinar, spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, said was Israel's 9/11, admitting they got us, and adding they surprised us and they came fast from many spots, both from the air, from the ground and from the sea. The 2-year restraint and apparent collaboration by Hamas with the Israeli idea that Gazans could be bought off with low-paid jobs in the settlements drew intense criticism from its supporters. But, this had been the Jared Kushner plan, Trump's son-in-law and Middle East envoy. This had been his plan in the 2019-2020 period. And going along with this plan, the so-called deal of the century as it was called, Hamas carefully aimed at building an impression that it had finally turned, had purely economic concerns on its mind, and that it had rejected war as a viable alternative. The first move the Qassam brigades made on Saturday the 7th of October was to launch a barrage of 3,000 rockets fired from Gaza that coincided with incursions by fighters who flew hang gliders and motorized paragliders over the border. The number and concentration of rockets led to a breakdown in the Iron Dome air defense system. In addition, the rockets provided cover for the hang gliders, which would only have been given the appearance on radar of birds. Once the fighters on hang gliders were on the ground, they secured the terrain so that an elite commando unit could storm the fortified electronic and cement wall built by Israel to prevent infiltration. The fighters breached the barriers with explosives, then sped off on their motorbikes to attack nearby military installations. Bulldozers then turned up to widen the gaps as more fighters sped through in four-wheel drives to join the initial attackers. A designated commando unit attacked the Israeli army's southern Gaza headquarters and jammed its communications, preventing personnel from calling commanders or each other. Files were downloaded onto backup systems and taken back to Gaza. Hostages and substantial arms caches were also gathered and taken to Gaza very early on in the attack. A well-publicized taking of hostages on social media involved fighters abducting partygoers fleeing a rave near a local kibbutz. An Israeli security source said that the rave was illegal, adding that Israeli troops, lulled by the recent Pacific attitude projected by Hamas's long-running subterfuge, had redeployed to the West Bank because of a surge of violence there. The way the news of all this reached the US and Europe was through an announcement by Israel's foreign ministry that the Palestinian fighters had killed 40 babies and beheaded several of them during an incursion into the Kfar Asa kibbutz. US President Joe Biden repeated this claim during an October 10 White House Rose Garden address, as media outlets across the West carried the story without seeking to back it up with evidence. CNN, citing military sources, reported that the Palestinian fighters had carried out ISIS-style executions, not just of babies, but also of pets. Joe Biden has since walked back these claims, as an official military spokesman in Israel says he has yet to receive evidence of those claims. Reporter Kit Klarenberg at the Grey Zone believes he has identified the source of these inflammatory claims as a certain David Ben Zion, a deputy commander of Unit 71 of the Israeli army, who also happens to be a long-standing extremist settler with apocalyptic beliefs about the Temple Mount and the razing of Gaza. The idea that the fighters in the Qassam brigades taking over military nerve centers in southern Israel would prioritize a search for babies and pets to behead is clearly absurd. But the claim has clearly caught the imagination of Western leaders who, one after the other, have pledged undying support for Netanyahu's war crimes in Gaza. Since the beginning of the Ukraine war, it would seem that all these leaders have lost the little amount of self-control that they might have once had. And this is why the situation is so dangerous now. People in charge have gone totally crazy. The inflammatory rhetoric about Hamas does its job, however, of giving the Israeli government cover for its insane reaction in Gaza. What is striking is the lack of any actual concrete military decisions over the past 5 days. Netanyahu's relationship with the Israeli army is so bad, and his corrupt image with the Israelis in general is now so widespread, that at the instigation of US Secretary of State Blinken, who is personally present in Israel to monitor the situation, a national unity government has been formed, which has Benny Gantz as its chief spokesman on military affairs. Israel has now demanded that the 1 million Gazans living in the northern section of the Strip move to the south in preparation for a raising operation and possibly a follow-up ground operation. Abu Ubaidah, spokesman for Qassam brigades, in his announcement yesterday evening reiterated that just as Hamas had prepared a nasty surprise for Israel on the 7th of October, it has another nasty surprise in store for the Israeli military if and when it begins its ground operation. In that regard, it should be noted that Dimitry Medvedev has claimed, the Russian leader, has claimed that US arms supplies to Ukraine have ended up currently in the hands of Hamas fighters. In any event, it is unlikely that any Gazans will move from their locations, whether in the north or in the south of the Strip. They all understand Israel's desire to ethnically cleanse Gaza. Old reports from Netanyahu's conversations with Hosni Mubarak in 2010 are making the round of the Israeli and Arab press. Netanyahu said to Mubarak at the time that he wanted to move Gaza's population to Sinai. Mubarak told him in no uncertain terms that this wasn't going to happen. For this reason, the current Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has demanded a stop to the current Gaza operation. Standing back from the situation, it would have occurred to any rational Israeli leader that sending 2 million Gazans to Egypt would totally destabilize the country. A country now of 110 million people living in poverty and under enormous stress. The outcome of such a move would be disastrous for Israel. There are no good outcomes for Israel here. And peace with the Palestinians isn't actually a good idea. It's the only idea in the current situation. The idea that might just ensure Israel's survival. The only regional power in the Middle East that announced its support for Israel is the UAE. The UAE had planned to be a hub for the India-Middle East-Europe economic corridor, otherwise known as the Biden corridor, which the so-called Abrahamic Accords between Israel and various Arab states were supposed to consolidate in political and diplomatic terms. The current state of affairs in Israel, to which the United States sought to delegate its affairs in the Middle East and North Africa, has rendered all this moot since the Hamas assault. The Biden corridor had been designed by the United States as competition for China's Belt and Road Initiative, and its avid promotion by Narendra Modi is one of the reasons Xi Jinping stayed away from the G20 meeting in New Delhi. Only the Pentagon seems to fully appreciate the appearance of Hussein Amir Abdullahian in Beirut and his announcement of Iran's red lines. Not only has it moved an extra battle group to support the Gerald Ford in the Mediterranean, it is also reinforcing its forces in the Strait of Hormuz. If the Pentagon gets its way over Blinken and the State Department, and the Israelis scale back their response to Hamas, then we will avoid a regional war and $250 oil. But there is another thing that must be bothering the Pentagon. Ukraine has taught us that in the brave new world of drones, digital warfare and hypersonic missiles, aircraft carriers are no longer superweapons. They have become targets. Thank you for listening to this video. Our delayed video on the dollar empire and the BRICS insurgency will hopefully appear soon with an accompanying article in the coming week or so. See the links in the video description box below on the subject in this video, and follow our website globalshift.com for past and future articles.